The ink on the divorce papers was barely dry when Brandon let out a laugh, flipping a black credit card onto the polished table. Go ahead, Audrey. That should cover a month's rent for a tiny studio in Queens. Think of it as a severance package for 2 years of a wasted marriage. His girlfriend, Jessica, snickered from her corner, already imagining how she would redecorate his penthouse. They saw Audrey as a poor orphan with no one to turn to. They thought her silence was fear, but they missed the man in the charcoal suit who sat quietly at the back of the conference room. They had no idea that man was Harrison Caldwell, the man who owned the skyscraper they were in, and also Audrey's father. And they were about to find out that signing those documents would completely destroy Brandon's entire future. This story will show you why the person you underestimate today might be the one holding your future in their hands tomorrow. It is a powerful reminder that true strength is not about showing off. It is about knowing exactly when to reveal your cards. The boardroom at Halloway and Associates had the scent of expensive leather, old coffee, and the final moments of a dying marriage. It was situated on the 45th floor of a skyscraper in the heart of Midtown Manhattan, with a wide view of a dreary, rain-soaked New York City. Audrey was seated at one side of the long, gleaming mahogany table. Her hands rested calmly in her lap. She had on a plain beige cardigan that looked well worn, and she wore no jewelry, not even the wedding ring she had removed 3 days prior. Across from her was Brandon. He perfectly fit the image of the ambitious tech founder he pretended to be. His suit was a custom-tailored navy blue made from Italian wool. His bow watch was a Patek Philippe, which cost more than a typical person's car, and he wore a smile so sharp it could break glass. "Let us just get this over with, Audrey," Brandon said, pushing a thick pile of documents across the table toward her. The papers made a harsh, scraping noise against the wood. "I am exhausted. You are exhausted. We both understand this marriage was a bad investment." "A bad investment," Audrey echoed in a soft voice. Her tone was firm, even as her gaze focused on the word dissolution, printed in bold letters at the top of the first page. "Do not act like you are the victim here." Brandon sighed and leaned back into his fancy office chair. "Listen, when I met you, you were a waitress at Luku. I believed I was saving you from that life. I expected you to be thankful for being the wife of the chief executive officer of Nexus Stream. But if we are being truthful, you were never meant for this kind of world. You have no idea how to dress for fancy events. You do not know how to speak with investors. You are just," he gestured vaguely, unable to find a polite way to say it, "uninteresting." A voice added from the other side of the room. Audrey did not even flinch. She was aware Jessica was present. Jessica, who was Brandon's executive assistant, was sitting on the windowsill, casually scrolling on her phone. She was 22, blonde, and her dress was completely out of place for a legal meeting. "She is just uninteresting, Brandon," Jessica repeated, without even glancing up from her phone. "And her cooking is strange. Who serves a pot roast to a vice president of marketing? It is so embarrassing." Brandon let out a small laugh. "Exactly. The issue is, Audrey, my company is preparing to go public. The initial public offering is scheduled for next month. Both my legal team and my public relations people think a clean split now is much better than dealing with it later. Being single is a better look than being married to a nobody when I am ringing the opening bell at the New York Stock Exchange." Audrey finally looked up at him. "So that is all it is. After 2 years of marriage, I am just a risk to your stock value. It is just business, Audrey. Do not get emotional about it." Brandon tapped the stack of papers. "This is the offer. Our prenuptial agreement states you get zero because you came into this with zero, but I am feeling generous. He reached inside his jacket and took out a black credit card. He tossed it on the table. It spun for a moment before landing close to her hand. That has $10,000 on it. It should be enough for a security deposit on an apartment in, who knows, New Jersey, or Queens, someplace cheap. And you can keep the Honda. The lawyer beside Brandon, a nervous man named Mr. Gables, cleared his throat. Mr. Cross. The Honda is technically leased through the company anyway, so just let her have the car, Gables, Brandon snapped. He was feeling generous. He glanced back at Audrey with a smirk. See, I am a good guy after all. Just sign the papers. I have a reservation at Per Se at 1 o'clock. Audrey looked down at the divorce settlement. Then her eyes moved to the credit card. $10,000. It felt like a lifetime ago, but it was only 2 years. She had met Brandon when he was just launching Nexus Stream. He was overwhelmed, struggling to make payroll. He spent his nights eating cheap takeout at the diner where she worked part-time to take a break from her studies. He never saved her. In fact, she had been the one to listen to his endless business pitches. She was the one who managed his chaotic life before he could ever afford an assistant like Jessica. She had even drained her own savings account. Money, she told him, was an inheritance, just to cover the office rent when his investors got cold feet. He had forgotten every bit of it. Do you honestly believe this is about your money, Brandon? Audrey asked softly. Everybody wants money, Audrey, particularly people like you who have none of their own, Brandon said, with a scoff. Just sign it. Stop making this take forever, unless you are hoping for some kind of miracle. Audrey took a deep breath. She reached inside her handbag. Brandon flinched for a second, maybe thinking she was pulling out a weapon or a counter lawsuit, but instead, she just took out a cheap, plastic ballpoint pen. I do not want your money, Brandon, she stated, and I do not want the Honda, either. Have it your way. Brandon laughed. That just means more for me. Now just sign on the dotted line. Audrey took the cap off the pen. She did not appear angry. She did not appear sad. She actually looked relieved. Just as the tip of her pen was about to make contact with the paper, the large oak door at the other end of the conference room slowly creaked open. The entire room went still as the door swung inward. Normally, during a serious divorce proceeding at Halloway and Associates, interruptions were absolutely not allowed. Mr. Gables, the lawyer, shot up from his seat, his face turning a deep shade of red. Excuse me, Gables, shouted. This is a confidential mediation. You are not permitted to just enter like this. A man walked into the room. He appeared to be older, probably in his early 60s, with perfectly styled silver hair. He was wearing a charcoal three-piece suit that did not loudly announce its expense. Instead, it whispered wealth. It was the kind of suit with no visible brand because the tailor understood that the client's name was the only label that was important. He carried a cane, not because he needed it, but more like a symbol of his authority. He did not speak a single word. He just walked to the other end of the room, chose a chair in the shadows away from the main conference table, and took a seat. Who is this person? Brandon asked loudly, swiveling his chair to face him. Gables, call security. The older man placed his hands on the head of his cane and looked directly at Audrey. His eyes were a sharp, icy blue, the exact same shade as hers. I am just here as an observer, the man said. His voice was deep and raspy, with an accent that sounded like a blend of old New York wealth and a European education. Please go on. Pay no attention to me. An observer, Jessica scoffed, jumping down from the windowsill. What do you think this is? Some kind of show for an audience? Get out of here, old man. Brandon, tell him to leave. He has a funny smell, like old clothes. Brandon got to his feet, aggressively fixing the cuffs of his shirt. Look here. Whoever you are, you need to leave. I am Brandon Cross, the Chief Executive Officer of Nexus Stream. I lease this entire floor for my legal team. You are trespassing on private property. The old man's expression did not change. He reached into the inside pocket of his jacket, took out a pair of glasses, and put them on. You lease the legal services, Mr. Cross. You do not lease the building. And from what I recall, this building is owned by Caldwell Holdings. Brandon stopped for a moment. So, what are you, the maintenance man here to check the light fixtures? Something along those lines, the man replied with a hint of sarcasm. I heard there was a disagreement over some assets. I find it interesting to see how the younger generation conducts their business affairs. Mr. Gables, the lawyer, suddenly turned incredibly pale. He stared intently at the man in the back of the room. He noticed the silver hair, the unique style of the suit's lapel, the gold ring on his smallest finger. Mr. Cross, Gables whispered frantically, you need to sit down. What? Brandon snapped back. Just sit down, now, Gables urged, his voice shaking. Let him be. But why? Because if we make a big deal out of this, the building's management might terminate our lease, Gables lied, sweating heavily. He knew precisely who that man was. He had passed by his portrait in the lobby every single morning for the past 15 years. But he was frozen with fear. He knew if he told Brandon that Harrison Caldwell, the mysterious billionaire of Manhattan, was in the room, Brandon would put on a fake act, and Gables suspected that the old man wanted to witness the real Brandon in action. Brandon just rolled his eyes and dropped back into his chair. Fine, have it your way. If this old guy gets some thrill from watching a divorce, let him watch. This is almost finished anyway. He shifted his attention back to Audrey. You see the kind of nonsense I have to put up with? Total incompetence all around me. Now sign the paper. Audrey had not once looked toward the old man. She kept her focus on the document. Are you absolutely certain about this, Brandon? Audrey asked him one final time. The moment we sign this, it is final. There is no turning back. I will walk out of this room, and I will no longer be your wife. You will have no more connection to me, and I will have no more connection to you. A complete separation. That is exactly what I have been dreaming of, Audrey. Brandon smirked. My meeting with the Caldwell Group is next week. Do you have any idea who they are? Of course you do not. They happen to be the largest venture capital firm in the entire country. Harrison Caldwell himself is going to review my company for a $100 million investment. I must be single. I cannot have any baggage holding me down. From the back of the room, the old man made a quiet sound. It could have been a cough, or maybe he was trying to hold back a laugh. Baggage? The old man repeated. Is that how you see a wife? Brandon did not even bother to turn around. A wife who contributes nothing to the partnership. Yes, she is dead weight. I need a partner who enhances my public image. Someone like Jessica. Jessica smiled brightly, walking behind Brandon to put her arms around his neck. Honey, why don't you tell him about our engagement party? Audrey froze completely. Her pen stopped just above the signature line. Engagement party. Brandon just shrugged his shoulders, showing no sign of guilt at all. Well, since we are making it official today, I did not see any reason to wait. We have already booked the Plaza Hotel for this Saturday. It will be a combined celebration for my divorce and my engagement party for Jessica. It is going to be the social event of the year with high society, investors, and the press. He looked at Audrey with fake sympathy. I would invite you, but we will have a strict guest list at the door. A chill settled deep inside Audrey's chest. It was not the pain of a broken heart anymore. It was the sharp sting of clarity. You booked the plaza, Audrey stated. The grand ballroom, Jessica bragged, chiming in. Only the best of everything. The flowers alone are costing $10,000. How interesting, Audrey murmured. She looked right past Brandon, past Jessica, and her gaze locked with the old man sitting quietly in the back of the conference room. The old man gave her a tiny, almost invisible nod. It was the signal she had been waiting for. Permission was granted. Audrey finally pressed the tip of the pen to the first page. She signed her full name with a smooth, practiced elegance. Audrey Caldwell Cross. She turned to the next page and signed again. Audrey Caldwell Cross. After signing the final page, she clicked the pen shut. Done, she whispered, her voice steady. She slid the stack of papers back across the polished table to Brandon. Finally, Brandon said, grabbing them and quickly scanning the signatures. God, that was like pulling teeth. Gables, get these filed right away. I want this divorce finalized by Friday. He stood, adjusting the button on his expensive suit jacket. He took Jessica's hand. Come on, honey, let's go celebrate. I could use a drink. He gave Audrey one last look. She remained seated, her hands folded calmly in her lap. You can keep the pen, Brandon said, as if granting a huge favor. And do not forget your little credit card. With that, he and Jessica turned and walked away. They passed the old man on their way out. Brandon stopped for a moment. Hey, Grandpa, the show is over. You can get back to fixing sinks or whatever it is you do. The old man stayed perfectly still. He simply smiled, a cold and predatory grin. The show, the old man said in a low voice, has only just begun, Mr. Cross. Brandon looked confused for a second, then just shook his head and walked out of the room, Jessica's heels echoing behind him. The heavy door slammed, leaving the room in silence. Mr. Gables, the lawyer, was shaking so badly that his glasses were slipping down his face. He quickly stood up and gave a deep, respectful bow to the man in the back. Mr. Caldwell, Gables stammered, his voice trembling. I had no idea. Harrison Caldwell paid the lawyer no attention. He rose from his chair, using a cane for support, and walked slowly toward the table where Audrey was sitting. Audrey did not get up. She just stared down at her own hands. Harrison reached her side. He looked at the divorce papers she had just signed, then at the black credit card Brandon had tossed aside, and then at his daughter. He called you baggage, Harrison said, his voice soft. Audrey finally looked up at him. Tears were starting to fill her eyes, but she fought to keep them from falling. Hi, Daddy. Harrison Caldwell, the billionaire who owned the very skyscraper they were in, the powerful head of the Caldwell Group, and the one man Brandon was desperate to impress, let out a long sigh. He reached over and put a comforting hand on her shoulder. I told you he was a fool, Audrey, Harrison said, but I never imagined he was actively trying to ruin himself. Harrison picked up the credit card Brandon had discarded, the $1 million severance package. He examined it with clear disgust. $10,000, Harrison said thoughtfully, for the heiress to the entire Caldwell fortune. He casually tossed the card into a nearby trash can. Come on, my dear, we have a lot of work to do. If that man wants to have an engagement party at the plaza on Saturday, then I believe we should make sure he gets one he will never forget. He thinks he has the grand ballroom booked, Audrey said, wiping a tear from her eye. But doesn't Uncle Cyrus own the plaza? He certainly does, Harrison smiled, a wicked glint in his eye. And I believe it is time for Brandon to learn a valuable lesson. In this city, you do not bite the hand that feeds you, especially when that hand holds the note on your every last asset. Harrison offered his daughter his arm. Let's go shopping. You are going to need a new dress for an engagement party. At that same moment, Brandon was trying to hail a yellow taxi, annoyed that the Uber surge pricing was so high for a man of his new stature. A fleet of 3 black Escalades pulled up smoothly to the curb in front of the building. Audrey emerged from the revolving doors, her arm linked through Harrison's. The doorman, a man who had never once acknowledged Audrey in the 2 years she brought Brandon his forgotten lunches, nearly stumbled backward in shock. He knew that man. Everyone in New York City knew Harrison Caldwell. "Good afternoon, Mr. Caldwell," the doorman stammered, fumbling to open the rear door of the first vehicle. "Afternoon, Higgins," Harrison replied, knowing the man's name because his company also owned the staffing agency. "Please see that my daughter gets into the car safely." The doorman froze solid. "Your daughter, sir?" He stared at Audrey, the quiet woman in the simple beige cardigan, the same woman he had seen crying in the lobby just last week after her husband yelled at her for being 5 minutes late. Audrey gave him a small smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Hello, Higgins." She gracefully slid onto the plush leather seat, the fresh scent of orchids filling the car. Harrison got in next to her, and the door closed, shutting out the blare of Manhattan traffic. "Home, sir?" the driver inquired. "The Hamptons estate, driver," Harrison instructed. "We could use some fresh air, and call Cyrus. I need him to prepare the Pearl Suite at the Plaza for Saturday, and tell him to double the security staff." As the car moved seamlessly into the flow of traffic, Audrey leaned her head against the headrest. The quiet in the car was thick with unspoken words. "I am sorry I did not tell you about him sooner," Audrey whispered. I needed to know that he loved me. Not my money, not my family connections. Just me, Audrey." "And now you know the truth," Harrison said gently. "It was a very expensive lesson, my dear, but a vital one. You spent 2 years playing the part of a supportive wife for a complete narcissist. You cooked for him, you cleaned, you secretly managed his finances. You even used the dividends from your trust fund to anonymously pay off his first business loan." Audrey nodded slowly. "He thinks some angel investor swooped in and saved him from going bankrupt." "I was the angel investor," Harrison grunted. "Or, more accurately, you were. And next week, when he sits across from the board of the Caldwell Group to ask for his initial public offering funding, he is going to learn that his angel has arrived to call in the debt." Across town, Brandon Cross was opening a bottle of expensive Dom Perignon in his brand new office. The space was all glass and chrome, designed to make any visitor feel small. Jessica was twirling in his office chair, holding up her champagne flute. "I cannot believe she actually signed the papers." Jessica laughed. "I really thought she would put up a fight for the apartment at least. The woman has no backbone." Brandon sneered as he put his feet up on his massive desk. "That is her biggest problem. She is small in every way. Small thoughts, small ambitions. She was dragging me down, Jess. But look at me now. I am single, my company's stock is climbing, and in 3 days, I will announce our engagement at the Plaza. It is the ultimate power play." Just then, his phone buzzed. The call was from an unknown number. "This is Brandon Cross," he answered with practiced smoothness. "Mr. Cross?" a formal, professional female voice said. "This is Eleanor Strick, the executive assistant to Harrison Caldwell." Brandon sat bolt upright, almost knocking over his champagne. He waved his hands frantically at Jessica, telling her to be silent. "Yes, Miss Strick. It is an honor to be hearing from you. Mr. Caldwell has reviewed your initial proposal for Nexus Stream," the woman continued. "He is intrigued. He would like to personally attend your event on Saturday evening at the Plaza. He feels it will be the ideal setting to evaluate your character before the final funding checks are signed next week." Brandon's heart felt like it was going to pound right out of his chest. Harrison Caldwell was coming to his party. This was it, the moment that would change everything. If Caldwell decided to back him, Brandon would be on the cover of Forbes magazine. "That would be absolutely incredible," Brandon managed to say. "Please let Mr. Caldwell know that he will be my guest of honor." "He will be there," the woman confirmed. "He is also bringing a guest, a silent partner in the Caldwell Group who holds the final say on all new investments. Impress this person, Mr. Cross. They have no patience for fools." The line went dead. Brandon let out a triumphant shout that echoed through the office. "We did it, Jess. Caldwell is coming. We are going to be billionaires." He grabbed Jessica and spun her around the room. "I need a new suit, the best one in the entire city. And you, go buy a dress that screams trophy wife. We have to be flawless. Absolutely nothing can go wrong." Back in the Hamptons, inside a massive oceanfront estate that was worth more than a small country, Audrey stood before a mirror that stretched from the floor to the ceiling. Her old beige cardigan was gone, replaced with a luxurious silk robe. Around her, a team of 3 elite stylists, flown in from Paris and Milan, were arranging dozens of couture gowns on racks. "No," Audrey said, waving away a fluffy pink dress. "That is too soft. That was the old Audrey." She walked along the line of designer dresses, her fingertips brushed against fine silks, rich velvets, and smooth satins. She paused in front of a gown the color of a starless night sky. It was a deep, shimmering obsidian blue with tiny diamond chips sewn into the fabric of the bodice. The dress was all sharp angles and structure. It demanded to be noticed. "This one," she said firmly. "A very bold selection, Miss Caldwell," the lead stylist commented. "This is from the Vanquish collection. It is designed for a woman who is on the hunt." Audrey smiled. It was the first real smile she had shown in months. It was a cold and dangerous smile. "Exactly," she said. "I am not going to a party to celebrate an engagement. I am going to attend a funeral." Was she going to a funeral? Yes, she was. Audrey glanced at her reflection, a dangerous glint in her blue eyes. It was the funeral for Brandon Cross's entire career. Saturday night descended on the city, and the air was thick with a heavy, electric feeling. The Plaza Hotel, a symbol of New York's high society on the edge of Central Park, was lit up like a beacon. A long line of limousines, 3 rows deep, idled at the curb. A swarm of photographers crowded the entrance, having received a tip from Brandon's publicity team about a huge tech industry announcement. The grand ballroom was a spectacle of blinding extravagance. Brandon had held nothing back, mainly because he charged it all to the company, banking on the Caldwell investment to make everything right later on. Massive crystal chandeliers, each the size of a small sedan, hung from the gold-covered ceiling. Waiters dressed in white formal jackets drifted through the guests like phantoms, carrying flutes of expensive champagne and platters of fine caviar. Brandon positioned himself at the very top of the grand staircase. Brandon Cross stood on the grand staircase, his hand gripping the polished banister so tightly his knuckles were white. A thin layer of sweat covered his forehead. "Stop fidgeting," Jessica hissed beside him. She was poured into a shimmering red dress, so tight it looked like a second skin made of sequins. The look was expensive and loud, completely lacking in grace. "You look like you have something to hide." "I'm on edge, Jess," Brandon mumbled, his eyes scanning the packed ballroom below. "Caldwell is not here yet. It is 8 o'clock. The invitation clearly said 7:30. "Relax. Billionaires are fashionably late," Jessica said, with a dismissive wave. "Look, is that not the vice president of Goldman Sachs over there? Why don't you go introduce yourself?" The entire room buzzed with the energy of Wall Street's most ruthless players. Men sported $5,000 suits, and women were adorned with diamonds. Yet, an unusual tension hung in the air, carried by hushed whispers. Mr. Gables, the lawyer who had finalized their divorce, just 3 days earlier, was at the bar, downing scotch like it was water. He looked incredibly pale. Every time the large ballroom doors creaked open, he jumped. "Gables!" Brandon called out, making his way down the stairs. "Why do you look like you just saw a ghost? You should be celebrating. Tonight is a big night." Gables stared at Brandon, his expression a strange mix of fear and sympathy. Mr. Cross, are you certain you reviewed the final guest list? Of course I did, Brandon said, with a scoff. Why do you ask? No particular reason, Gables muttered, quickly turning back to his drink. Just good luck. At that very moment, the string quartet, which had been playing Mozart, fell silent. The massive double doors at the far end of the ballroom swung open with dramatic flair. A deep quiet settled over the crowd, not out of politeness for a new arrival, but in awe of the sheer power that had just entered the room. Harrison Caldwell was framed in the doorway, looking every bit like a king returning to his throne. He wore a custom tuxedo that seemed molded to his body. He leaned lightly on a cane, and his silver hair shone brightly under the crystal chandeliers. A collective gasp went through the room. Harrison Caldwell was a recluse, a legend who never attended social events. His mere presence was a massive endorsement for Brandon Cross. A wide grin spread across Brandon's face. He quickly straightened his jacket and started moving toward the entrance. Mr. Caldwell, I am so glad you could make it. But Harrison remained still, standing in the doorway as if waiting. He turned his head slightly, extending a hand back into the hallway. The announcer's voice boomed, though it trembled with nerves. Presenting Ms. Audrey Caldwell. The name seemed to linger in the silent air. Caldwell. Brandon stopped in his tracks. He blinked, confused. Audrey. No, that was impossible. His Audrey was a nobody. He could not even recall her maiden name, mostly because he had never bothered to ask about her family. And then she walked into the light. It was definitely Audrey, but this was not the woman who favored beige sweaters and seemed to apologize for taking up space. This version of Audrey was a vision of cold revenge, sculpted from ice and draped in diamonds. A stunning midnight blue gown clung to her figure, with a high slit that revealed a pair of dangerously sharp heels. Her hair, which he only remembered in a messy bun, now fell in perfect, gleaming waves around her shoulders. A sapphire necklace, once belonging to the Russian Romanov dynasty and worth more than Brandon's entire company, rested around her neck. She gracefully took her father's arm and raised her chin. Her gaze swept over the room, dismissing hundreds of powerful people until her eyes found Brandon. She did not smile. She simply held his stare. "Oh my God," Jessica whispered, her clutch slipping from her fingers. "Is that your wife?" Brandon felt all the color drain from his face. His legs felt weak. "No, it cannot be. She is completely broke. I gave her a check for $10,000. The crowd parted like a sea as Harrison and Audrey began to walk through the ballroom. The silence was absolute. Every single person was watching them. Brandon, running on a mix of pure adrenaline and disbelief, forced a smile and stepped directly in their path. "Mr. Caldwell." Brandon's voice was shaky. He cleared his throat to try again. "Welcome. And Audrey, what are you doing here? Did you get hired as one of the caterers?" It was a foolish, desperate jab. A low murmur went through the guests. Someone let out a nervous laugh. Harrison Caldwell glared at Brandon with utter contempt. "Mr. Cross, you appear to be mistaken." Well, yes," Brandon stammered. "This is my ex-wife. I have no idea how she managed to get past your security." "She did not have to get past security," Harrison cut in, his voice resonating through the now silent ballroom. "She owns the security company. As a matter of fact, she owns this hotel." The champagne flute in Brandon's hand slipped through his fingers, shattering on the marble floor with a loud crash. "What?" Brandon whispered, stunned. "Allow me to introduce you to, properly," Harrison announced, placing a proud hand on Audrey's back. "You know her as Audrey, the woman you divorced 3 days ago, because you found her boring and claimed she offered nothing of value. But the rest of the world knows her as Audrey Caldwell. My one and only daughter. She is the sole heir to the entire Caldwell fortune and the majority shareholder of the venture capital firm you are currently begging for an investment from. The room exploded with noise. Gasps and shocked whispers spread like wildfire among the guests. Cell phones were quickly raised to record the unbelievable scene. Jessica slowly took a step backward, creating distance between herself and Brandon. Audrey then took a step forward. The scent of her perfume, something incredibly expensive and rare, reached Brandon. "Hello, Brandon," she said. Her voice was confident and smooth, completely different from the timid whisper he was used to. "You said you wanted a partner who matched your ambitions, remember? Someone with influence, someone with wealth." She gestured around the magnificent ballroom at the bewildered investors and the terrified lawyer. "Well, here I am," she said, with a slight tilt of her head. "But I must warn you, my appearance fee is significantly more than $10,000. Brandon's jaw hung open, but no words came out. "Audrey, wait, honey, I had no idea. You never said anything. You never asked," she responded with icy calm. "You were always far too busy talking about yourself." "But the prenup," Brandon said, desperately grasping for a way out. "We signed a prenup. You do not get anything from me." Mr. Gables, the lawyer, stepped out from the crowd, looking as if he wished the floor would swallow him whole. "Actually, Mr. Cross—" "Be quiet, Gables," Brandon snapped. "No, please let him speak," Audrey insisted. Gables nervously wiped sweat from his brow. "Mr. Cross, the prenuptial agreement specified that both parties would leave the marriage with the assets they brought into it. Since Ms. Caldwell entered the marriage with, well, billions of dollars in assets held in various offshore trusts, and you entered it with considerable debt, the division of property is quite straightforward. Furthermore," Harrison added, clearly savoring every second, "since you used funds from your Nexus Stream company to lease the Honda she was driving, and you admitted in a recorded legal deposition that you were giving it to her as a gift. That is a clear transfer of company assets. And since you just admitted to fraud by throwing this private party on the company's dime," Harrison leaned in, his voice dropping to a low growl. "I do not think we will be investing in Nexus Stream, Mr. Cross. In fact, I believe my daughter, who happens to sit on the board of the bank that holds all of your business loans, might just be calling in your debts this evening." Brandon stared at Audrey. He was looking at the woman he had thrown away like she was nothing. "Audrey," he pleaded, his voice trembling uncontrollably. "Please, this was all a huge mistake. Jessica was meaningless. I was under so much stress. We can fix this. We can renew our vows right here, right now. Look, all our friends are here." Audrey just looked at him. For a brief moment, Brandon thought he saw a flicker of pity in her eyes. Then she laughed, a light, almost musical sound. "Renew our vows?" she repeated. "Brandon, I did not come here to get back together with you. I came here to destroy you." She then turned to the band. "Play something cheerful," she called out. "I suddenly feel like dancing." As the music started up again, Brandon stood frozen among the shards of his broken champagne glass. He was forced to watch as the love of his life and the fortune he had desperately chased for years was gracefully spun away in the arms of a handsome European count who had just cut in. The trap had been set, and Brandon was the fool who had walked right into it. The lively Viennese waltz filled the grand ballroom of the Plaza Hotel, a cheerful sound that was a jarring contrast to the absolute ruin happening in the middle of the dance floor. For Brandon Cross, his entire world had just collapsed into a series of terrifying outcomes. Just 10 minutes ago, he had felt like the king of New York. Now he was nothing more than a laughingstock. He stood motionless as the crowd literally pulled away from him. In the world of high society, failure is like a virus, and public humiliation is a death sentence. Nobody wanted to be caught standing anywhere near the man who had just divorced the Caldwell heiress for his secretary. "Brandon!" A sharp voice hissed next to him. It was Jessica. He turned to her, desperate for a single ally. "Jess, listen to me. We have to control this narrative. We can tell people I knew who she was all along. We will say it was just a strategic move for tax reasons." Jessica stared at him as if he were an insect she had found on her expensive gown. She was not even looking at his face. Her eyes were fixed over his shoulder, watching the handsome Count spin Audrey across the floor. She was looking at the incredible diamonds sparkling on Audrey's neck. "You idiot!" Jessica spat out. "You are an absolute moron." "What? Honey, we are a team in this," Brandon pleaded, reaching for her. She pulled her arm back sharply. "Do not touch me. You told me she was the waitress. You swore to me she was a nobody. You just made me look like a complete fool in front of Harrison Caldwell." "I did not know!" "That is even worse," Jessica shrieked, her voice rising in pitch and cutting through the music. "You lived with that woman for 2 years, and you never figured out she was worth billions of dollars? You are not a chief executive officer, Brandon. You are a blind, pathetic loser." She twisted the engagement ring off her finger, a 3-carat diamond he had purchased on credit just the day before, and threw it hard against his chest. "I am finished. Do not ever call me again. I need to find someone here who can actually afford to pay for my Uber home." Jessica then stormed away, pushing through the stunned crowd to get to the bar, where she immediately started a conversation with a vice president from J.P. Morgan. Brandon was left standing completely alone. The ring had bounced off his suit and rolled out of sight under a nearby table. He did not even bother to look for it. Suddenly, he found himself surrounded, not by friends and supporters, but by the very predators he had invited to his party. Cross. The voice belonged to Simon Trent, one of his key investors. "Is it true? Is Caldwell holding the debt from the second round of funding?" "Simon, just let me explain," Brandon pleaded. "I don't want your explanations," Trent cut him off. "I want my money out. If Harrison Caldwell is coming after you, this company is finished. I am activating the clawback clause this evening." "You can't do that," Brandon said, his voice catching. "That will wipe out our operating funds." "Just watch me," Trent sneered, pulling out his phone. "I am calling my lawyers right now." Just then, another man approached them. The man was a reporter from the Wall Street Journal, the very one Brandon had pleaded with to attend. "Mr. Cross," the reporter began, thrusting a voice recorder toward him, "do you have a comment on the rumor that you used company money for your mistress's apartment? Miss Caldwell brought up a forensic audit." "No comment," Brandon snapped. "Get that thing out of my face." He slapped at the small device. The reporter grinned. "Attacking a member of the press? That will make a fantastic story for the Sunday paper. Something like, 'CEO has a meltdown at his ex-wife's celebration.'" From a balcony high above the ballroom, Harrison Caldwell and Audrey observed the unfolding chaos. A server brought them fresh glasses of champagne. "It is quite savage," Harrison remarked, taking a small drink as he watched the crowd turn on Brandon. "He always craved the spotlight," Audrey replied, her tone completely empty of sympathy. "He wanted all eyes on him. I simply granted his wish." She glanced down at Brandon, who was sweating and yelling at an investor. His tie was crooked, and his face was a deep shade of red from pure rage. He seemed so insignificant. "Did you ever really love him?" Harrison asked in a low voice. Audrey paused for a moment. She watched as Brandon pushed away a waiter trying to hand him a glass of water. "I loved the person I thought he was," she finally answered. "I loved the man who would eat grilled cheese sandwiches with me at 2 in the morning, dreaming about changing the world with his ideas." But that man was never real. He was just an actor looking for a bigger audience. Well, Harrison said, turning from the balcony railing, the show is over. Let us go, my dear. I think the board of directors at the bank has scheduled an emergency meeting for 8 o'clock tomorrow morning to go over the foreclosure of Nexus Stream. Foreclosure? Audrey's eyebrow lifted slightly. Oh, absolutely, Harrison confirmed with a grim smile. He fell behind on a payment 3 months ago. We decided to let it go because, at the time, he was part of the family. We are no longer letting it go. 3 weeks later, New York City was showing no mercy. The November wind howled through the concrete canyons, pushing a sharp rain that could soak through a cheap coat in seconds. Brandon Cross was standing outside the massive glass headquarters of the Caldwell Group. He was no longer wearing his expensive Italian wool suit, which had been sold to a second-hand shop. Instead, he had on a generic raincoat he picked up from a pharmacy. He looked a decade older. His face was thin and needed a shave, and his eyes seemed empty. His collapse had been rapid and complete. The morning after the disaster at the plaza, the SEC had started an investigation into how he used company money. The board of Nexus Stream had fired him before noon. By 2 o'clock, the bank demanded payment on his personal loans. His penthouse was taken. His car was repossessed. They even froze his credit cards. He was now sleeping on his friend Mark's couch in Jersey City. But that morning, Mark had told him he needed to be out by the weekend because he was killing the mood. Brandon looked at his watch. It was a cheap, plastic digital model. 12:30 in the afternoon. He knew she would be coming out. She always went to lunch at 12:30. He at least remembered that detail. The revolving doors began to turn. Brandon's heart jumped. A group of smiling executives came out, and right in the middle of them was Audrey. She looked amazing. She was wearing a cream-colored power suit, and her hair was perfectly styled. She was holding a tablet and speaking to a man who looked like a politician. Brandon rushed toward her. Audrey! The security guards at the entrance moved immediately, their hands dropping to their belts. They saw a messy-looking man shouting at the heiress. Ma'am, get back, one of the guards ordered. Audrey paused. She looked up and recognized him. She raised a hand to the guards. It is all right, Frank. I know this man. The guards were hesitant, but they stepped back, creating a protective wall between Audrey and the street, with about a 5-foot gap. Brandon approached the line, rain dripping off his nose. Audrey, he said, out of breath, I have been trying to reach you. You changed your number. Yes, I did, she replied calmly. How have you been, Brandon? How have I been? Brandon let out a wild, broken laugh. I am destroyed, Audrey. They seized everything. The company, the apartment. I have $40 left in the world. $40? I remember having only $40, Audrey said, evenly. I was 19, living in a college dorm, refusing to use my father's money because I wanted to see what the real world was like. It builds character. Do you not think? Stop it, Brandon hissed, then lowered, his voice when passers-by started to stare. Look, I understand you wanted to give me a lesson. Well, lesson learned, okay? I have been humbled. I am sorry. I was a self-centered jerk. But this is just too much. You cannot ruin someone's entire life over a bad breakup. I did not ruin your life, Brandon, Audrey corrected him. I just stopped paying for it. Paying for it? Who do you think persuaded the landlord to give you 3 extra months on your office lease when you were just starting out? Audrey asked. Me. I gave him cash from my grandmother's trust fund. And who do you think reworked your business proposal before your first big investment round? That was me. I rebuilt the entire financial projection while you were asleep. Brandon just stared. You did the financial model? Yes, And who do you think spoke to the editors at TechCrunch to get you that first big feature story? Audrey stepped closer, her expression firm. I was never just a waitress, Brandon. I was your co-founder. I was the engine that kept your entire broken-down operation running. You simply never took the time to look under the hood. Brandon's shoulders sagged. The rain felt cold, but this truth was much colder. He understood, with a nauseating shock, that she was right. Every single time he had a lucky break, over the past 2 years, Audrey had been there in the background smiling, bringing him coffee, telling him everything will be fine. He had confused her quiet competence with being invisible. I need help, Audrey, Brandon whispered, his ego finally breaking into pieces. I have nowhere else to turn. Nobody will give me a job. My reputation is ruined in the city. Please, just some money or work. I will clean the floors. I will do anything. Audrey looked at him for a long moment. She looked at the man who had tossed a credit card at her and told her to go live in Queens. She reached into her purse. Brandon held his breath. Was she about to write him a check? Give him a key to a new place? She took out a business card. It was a simple white card with just a phone number printed on it. This is the number for a hiring agency in Ohio, she said, as she handed it to him. They focus on entry-level sales jobs. It is decent, honest work. You will get a base pay plus commission. The cost of living is low in Ohio. Brandon looked down at the card. Ohio, an entry-level sales job. It is a chance to start over, Brandon, she said, her voice softening just a little. New York was not for you. You lost yourself here. Maybe in a new place where nobody knows your name, you can learn how to be a person again, instead of just a CEO. She started to leave. Audrey, he called, one last time. She paused but refused to look back at him. Did you ever really love me? He pleaded. Or was I just another one of your projects? Audrey saw her own reflection in the building's glass doors, the very building she was destined to run one day. I loved you so much that I hid my own strength just so you could feel powerful, she said. But I finally loved myself enough to stop making myself small. She stepped into the revolving door and disappeared into the welcoming light of the lobby, leaving Brandon all alone in the rain. He stared down at the small business card, which read, Midwest Auto Sales and Solutions. He then looked up at the massive skyscraper vanishing into the gray clouds. It dawned on him in that moment that the gap between himself and Audrey was not just about glass doors and security teams. It was as wide as a galaxy. He slid the card into his pocket, flipped his collar up to block the wind, and started the long trek to the bus terminal. It had been exactly 2 years since that cold, wet afternoon outside the Caldwell Tower. New York City had forgotten, the way it always does. The collapse of Nexus Stream was now just a small story in the business section, a warning used in business schools to teach about the risks of borrowing too much and underestimating your partner. In the top floor office of the Caldwell Group, Audrey was seated behind the huge oak desk that had once been her father's. Harrison Caldwell had officially retired to a vineyard in Tuscany 6 months earlier, placing his entire empire in Audrey's care. She was not the same woman who had sat in that depressing conference room in a plain beige sweater. She was more decisive, more powerful. Her hair was now in a stylish bob, and she wore a custom-tailored emerald suit that radiated authority. She was looking over the quarterly charity donations when her assistant, a young man named Leo, knocked. Miss Caldwell, Leo said, the mail is here. It is mostly routine, but there is one personal envelope. It does not have a return address, but the postmark is from Columbus, Ohio. Audrey stopped what she was doing. Her pen hung motionless above the document. Ohio. Just leave it there, Leo. Thank you. After the door clicked shut, Audrey stared at the envelope. It was made of cheap white paper. She recognized the handwriting, but it was not the messy, hurried script of a self-important CEO. It was neater, more careful. She took her silver letter opener and slid it open. Inside, there was no letter, no lengthy apology, and no excuses. There was only a cashier's check made out to Audrey Caldwell. The amount was for $10,000. Audrey looked at the number. $10,000. It was the precise amount Brandon had thrown on the mahogany table when they got divorced, his severance pay for her. She flipped the check over. On the back, written in small blue ink, was a simple message, "For the Honda and the lesson, B." Audrey exhaled a breath she had not realized she was holding. She leaned back in her chair and closed her eyes. The towering skyscrapers of New York City were a world away, a forgotten dream. His new reality was a snow-covered car lot in the Midwest. 500 miles from his past life, on the bleak edges of Columbus, Ohio, a bitter wind howled. Brandon Cross tried to breathe warmth into his frozen hands and kicked the thick snow from his work boots. His heavy parka bore the logo of Midwest Auto Sales on the chest. A voice bellowed from the office. "Hey, Cross!" It was his manager, a large, gruff man everyone called Big Tony. "You have a customer on the lot, checking out the used sedans." "I'm on it, Tony!" Brandon shouted back, jogging into the freezing air. The arrogant swagger he once had was long gone. Now, his steps were driven by purpose and humility. He made his way toward a young couple who were shivering beside a line of vehicles. They looked completely overwhelmed, clearly shopping for their first car together, and he could see the worry on their faces about credit scores and down payments. "Afternoon, folks," Brandon said with a warm, genuine smile that now reached his eyes. "It's a cold one. Are you looking for something dependable that won't empty your pockets?" "Yeah," the young man replied nervously. We don't have a lot to spend. We just need a reliable way to get to our jobs." Brandon nodded with deep understanding. "I get it. I know what it's like to have to start all over." He gestured to a nearby car. "Let me show you this Civic. It has low mileage, and I can talk to the finance manager to find you a rate that you can actually afford. We are not in the business of tricking people." As he guided them toward the car, a loud, flashy red convertible screeched into the dealership. It was completely out of place in the gray landscape of winter. A loud, obnoxious, and very expensive machine. When the driver's door swung open, a woman emerged. She was wearing a fur coat that looked both cheap and fake, and her high heels were already sinking into the slushy snow. It was Jessica. Brandon froze in place. He had not seen her for 2 years, not since the day she threw his engagement ring at him in a crowded plaza. She looked older, and her expression was harder. She wore far too much makeup, a desperate attempt to hide the stress lines around her eyes. She saw him, and a cruel smirk spread across her face as she walked toward him. "Well, well," she laughed, looking his parka up and down. "Look at the great Brandon Cross, selling beat-up cars in the middle of nowhere." Brandon turned to the young couple. "Please give me one moment, folks," he said before walking over to her. He did not feel the old rage anymore. All he felt was pity. "Hello, Jessica. What are you doing in Ohio?" "Just visiting some family," she lied with practiced ease. "I heard you were out here, so I thought I would look you up." Her gaze traveled over his body, and she licked her lips. "You know, Brandon, New York is so boring now, and I finally broke up with that banker. The man was so cheap. Maybe you and I could get a drink. For old time's sake. I bet you are pretty lonely out here." She moved in close, her hand reaching for the zipper on his jacket. "We were good together, Brandon. We were a real power couple. We could find a way to get out of this town, together." Brandon looked down at her hand. He remembered how quickly she had abandoned him the moment the money was gone. He remembered the intense humiliation. He gently took her hand and moved it away from his coat. "I am not lonely, Jessica." Brandon spoke softly. He turned and pointed to the large glass window of the dealership. Inside, a woman was sitting at the reception desk. She was not a fashion model. She was not wealthy. She was Sarah, the receptionist. She had simple brown hair, a kind smile, and she was in the middle of knitting a scarf. She glanced up, saw Brandon looking at her, and gave him a happy wave. Brandon waved right back. "I have everything I need right here," Brandon told Jessica. "And I have customers to help, people who actually need something, not just a performance. You are pathetic." Jessica sneered, her ego clearly wounded. "You are a nobody." "Maybe," Brandon shrugged, "but at least I can sleep at night." He turned his back on her and walked over to the young couple who were waiting by the Civic. "Sorry about that," Brandon said to them. "Just a ghost from the past. Now, let me show you the amount of trunk space in this beauty." While he was explaining the car's warranty, he felt a lightness in his chest that he had not experienced in many years. He had sent the check that very morning. It had taken him 2 years of saving every single commission, eating instant noodles for dinner, and living in a tiny studio apartment just to scrape together $10,000. He was broke all over again, but he had finally paid his debt. Back in New York City, Audrey picked up her office phone. "Finance department," she said. "Yes, Miss Caldwell. I am sending a check down to you for $10,000. Please deposit it into the Second Chance Scholarship Fund." "Of course. Should we list the name of the donor?" Audrey looked at the check one final time before she dropped it into her outbox. She thought about the man she had married, the one who had wanted to conquer the entire world, and the man who was finally learning that the world is not something you conquer, but something you have to earn. "List the donor as anonymous," Audrey instructed. She stood up from her desk and walked to the floor-to-ceiling window. The sun was setting over Central Park, bathing the city in a golden light. She was not angry anymore. The wheel of karma had come full circle. He had lost the millions that he never truly deserved. But maybe, in the cold snow of Ohio, he had found the soul that he had lost so long ago. Audrey smiled, touched the cool glass of the window, and whispered to the city below, "We are even, Brandon. We are finally even." She turned off the lights in her office and walked out the door, ready to go meet her father for dinner. She walked with her head held high, not because of her family's billions, but because she knew exactly who she was. And this time, nobody would ever underestimate her again. And that is the story of how a $10,000 severance check cost a man an entire empire. But maybe, just maybe, it bought him back his own humanity. It is a harsh reminder that in life, you can never be sure who is watching you from the back of the room. Brandon thought he was just signing divorce papers with a powerless woman, but what he was really signing was his own resignation from the high life. What do you think? Did Audrey go too far with her revenge at the plaza? Or did Brandon get the exact lesson he deserved? And do you believe that Brandon's repayment of the $10,000 earns him a chance at forgiveness? I would love to read your thoughts in the comment section below. I read every single one. If you enjoyed this story about karma, betrayal, and redemption, please smash that like button, share this video with a friend who loves good drama, and subscribe to the channel with your notifications turned on so that you never miss a new story. Thanks for listening. This content was carefully researched, developed, and manually edited by our team to bring you meaningful lessons and inspiration. Every story we share is crafted with heart to remind you of the values that truly matter in life.